Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Digital Law Podcast, brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. As a bit of background, we're a law firm that works solely on technology, cybersecurity, and legal issues. In each episode, we look at stories in the law relating to digital technology from around the world with an emphasis on data protection and cybersecurity. I'm Amelia Davies, an apprentice solicitor at Digital Law UK, and I'm joined by my colleague Peter Wright, and we're just going to be running through some news stories that have been coming up this week. I'll pass over to Peter to introduce himself, and then we will get started.
Thank you, Amelia. So my name's Peter. I'm a solicitor and the managing director at Digital Law, and we've just got two stories really we wanted to bring you up to date with this week. So I will pass that back to you, Amelia, to get us started.
Thanks, Peter. So this first story, if you are a regular listener, you will not be surprised on our coverage. So we are going to be looking at the online safety bill. Specifically here, the issues with the backdoor for breaking encryption. And this is going to be our kind of main focus here, this backdoor. So as we have mentioned before, the online safety bill is kind of working its way through Parliament, and there has been a lot of tennis going on in terms of changes, amendments, and people's opinions. Specifically the opinions of big tech companies who use end-to-end encryption. So we're looking at the likes of WhatsApp and Signal specifically here.
Yes. So the online safety bill, the gift that keeps on giving, briefly is a device that's been around for so long now in the British Parliament that MPs, when it comes up to be looked at, as well as legislators in the House of Lords, are thoroughly sick to the back teeth of it. It is back, as we are recording today on the 12th of September, it is back for debate again in the House of Commons, having been in the Lords again last week. There is concern that it contains powers for the UK Home Office and for the UK Communications Regulator, Ofcom, to be able to intercept encrypted communications, which of course is something at the moment that can't actually be done. So the idea is it's saying, look, the technology will be developed that will mean that before a message or communication goes into the encrypted end-to-end portal of something like WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, the idea is that before that happens, it will be possible to scan the material in theory. And this is the thing, it's an incredibly well-meaning reason for this, is they're saying, well, these communications platforms are being used to commission crime, fraud, child abuse, various nasty, nefarious things. And they're saying, look, in order for us to be able to tackle the criminals, in order to do something about this, we need this power. There's been quite a small but very vociferous lobby in the UK made up of, parents of children who've been on the receiving end of abuse, and in some instances have either been very, very ill, have then ended up committing suicide or killed themselves. So you can see why, if that happened to you as a parent, you'd be pretty distraught and want to do something about it. So no, it didn't happen to anyone else. So I don't think anyone's arguing on the well-meaning origin of the intention behind this bill. The problem is that it is sort of going into the realms of where this technology simply does not exist at the moment, as well as devising a power that on the face of it, the government, even in the House of Lords last week, said Ofcom will not use the power here because the technology simply does not exist. And that was enough to make some of the bosses, including Meredith Whittaker at Signal, to say, well, this is progress. You're actually realizing that this technology doesn't exist, this power won't have any use, and that will give us confidence to at least be able to continue trading in the UK, which Signal, WhatsApp and others have said, look, we'll have to withdraw from operating in the UK if the bill in its current form passes.
So, Peter, you've mentioned the fact that realistically there are good intentions behind this backdoor
Yes.
that they've labelled. But there are kind of other ways of looking at it, because if you have got this backdoor for encryption, there are various other nefarious purposes that this said backdoor could be used for. For example, if you are a hacker and there is this kind of backdoor open, you can then go into people's encrypted messages, and that could mean you can see family photos, pictures of children. And if you're a highly regulated area such as law firms, we use a lot of our communication through the likes of Signal, which is encrypted and is secure.
Yes.
But if there is that level of backdoor, you could get a lot of information for fairly
Yeah.
easy way to do things.
So by definition, it's then no longer secure.
Oh yes.
Is the point. And yeah, there's the concern that yes, if the government can get in there, so can a hacker. There's also the fact that if, say, the government is intercepting this stuff in bulk and then keeping it somewhere else, there is the concern that, look, the government IT projects in the UK don't have a brilliant history in terms of either being on time, within budget, or entirely secure. Witness all of the fines that the UK Cabinet Office receives on a regular basis. So, the idea of the British state handling and processing such large volumes of data, even if with the laudable aim of saying, well, we're trying to keep you safe, becomes a bit of a concern. And then there's also, of course, the ethical catch-22 of saying, well, look, we're trying to keep you safe. And in order to keep you safe, we're going to take away your freedoms. I think your words earlier on when we looked at this were Orwellian.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that definitely brought me back to George Orwell style novels.
Yes. So, not great. Where we are at I say we're recording this at 5 o'clock on the 12th of September. There is an amendment that has been placed by MPs before the House of Commons to debate this. If you take a look at Meredith Whittaker's Twitter feed, which I can recommend, because obviously as President and CEO of Signal, she's been very concerned about all of this. And she says, look, she supports this amendment that's been put by David Davis and Caroline Lucas MP, which would make a change on the face of the bill. That's the crucial thing. It's one thing for someone to stand up in Parliament and say, oh, we won't use this power, or Ofcom won't use it. Well, that's very nice, but, will the next Secretary of State have the same view? Will the next government, and we could be 12 months away or less from a new government in the UK. So then you say, well, are they going to be bound by a comment that a minister stood up and said at the dispatch box? Of course not. As usual, it's not worth the felt it's written on. So in this instance, it needs to be actually on the face of the bill. That's what this amendment would do. Unfortunately, there's lots of chatter as usual no, it's not Twitter, is it? It's X. Super app, I keep forgetting. There's lots of chatter on X. It goes, oh, it'd be great if the amendment passes. Well, yes, but for an amendment to pass, that means the government would have to support it. This is a piece of government legislation, therefore they will be whipping their MPs to agree to it. And it's very unlikely you're going to get a majority of people to say, yes, we'll have this amendment, unless the government agrees with the amendment. Is that likely to happen? Probably not. Even though, Amelia, we were talking about this earlier, you've got the idea of the UK, in Rishi Sunak's words, being a science superpower. And we want to have tech investment. We want to have more high net worth jobs and highly skilled jobs in the UK. And arguably, if you're going to have legislation like this that heavily regulates and forces some tech platforms out of the UK, that doesn't necessarily marry up with your stated aim of making the UK a science superpower, making it Europe's Silicon Valley. So there is that problem. There is now, last year, or was it earlier this year, Rishi Sunak created a Department of Science, the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, I think. And they've been trying to gently make the point that this really isn't the most competitive piece of legislation that the government could have come up with. But as it is, the Home Office has sort of just been determined to carry on with this. And let's not forget either that it's not as though this was Rishi Sunak's bill. It wasn't Boris Johnson's bill. This, I think, was a creature of Theresa May's government, but it probably has its origins with David Cameron. So you've got to go through quite a few UK prime ministers, and we seem to change them on a almost seasonal basis now. So you can sort of go back quite a long way to sort of work out. There's people now carrying the can and trying to deal with this thing that weren't the people that came up with it. But a bit like Frankenstein's monster, they've still got to try and deal with it, even though they weren't responsible for the original design or sewing on the different arms and legs that we've now got.
But like you say, there is a noble cause to it, but it's just not quite the right way of attacking it. And unfortunately, where we are right now, we don't know what's going to happen. Tomorrow could have a different story, which is opening up new doors and new amendments. Yeah. And, we might be covering this again next week in terms of things that have been happening over the next few days.
Yes, indeed. So who knows? I mean, the government might decide, oh, we're heading for a defeat here, and it might decide to support the amendment. It could withdraw the debate, but full stop. If it thinks it has a problem, let's not forget, though, that even though there have been something like several hundred by-elections, it seems, over the course of the last year, the UK government retains a healthy majority of, I think it's about 360 MPs, and you need 316 for a majority. So um, you know, unless the government decides to take action on this, more than likely the amendment will fail. But if the bill is passed in its current form, you can either say have assurances, but what's on the face of the bill doesn't necessarily fit with what's being said in Parliament. So let's see what happens. We might be telling you a whole new story again when we come back to this again next week.
Thanks, Peter. So moving on to another superpower. So we have mentioned Signal and WhatsApp. We are now going to be looking at Google. So it's Google versus the US in the biggest antitrust trial in decades. So the Justice Department has filed its antitrust lawsuit against Google nearly 3 years ago now, and this was done during the Trump administration. And this is charging that the company has used its internet search dominance to gain an unfair advantage against competitors. I mean, you can potentially see why, because if you wanted to know something, what do you say? Oh, I'll just Google it. So you can understand it's like the whole thing here in the UK. You don't say you're going to go and vacuum. 9 out of 10 people say you're going to Hoover because
Yes.
that is the well-known brand.
It is, bizarrely. And that's just it. No one turns around and says, oh, I'll just go and Bing that for you.
I think people will turn around and go, what on earth are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. It's yes, no one's going, oh, I'll just check Ask Jeeves anymore. So Google has this massive 90% dominance in terms of any search results. And the reason for that is, even though I don't think it's necessarily perfect and it's heavily skewed due to the way that Google's algorithm works, they still give you a large volume of data in terms of very accurate search information based on whatever your search criteria was in the first place, before you then go into the vast other Google suite of products and services related to search, SEO, marketing, etc., that are all, of course, then integrated with the search. And this is where Google, due to its size and dominance, I mean, let's not forget that its turnover is the same as the average G7 country. It's $1.7 trillion it recently turned over. So that's more than the average country around the world. And I'll say, I think the UK only turns over a couple of trillion. So yeah, they're pretty big, and arguably they have. And this is what this litigation is looking at, is potentially saying, look, you've been abusing your position in various ways. One is that they've sort of used the fact they have almost unlimited resources. And if you're turning over 1.7 trillion, you've got a lot of resources. They've been sort of bunging a few billion over the years in an entirely open and transparent way to Apple to say, can you put us as the default search engine on your Apple device? They've been bundling through their Android system. You've got Chrome and everything integrated, as well as very often a Google search tool that will automatically give you search results, sometimes with that tool actually just as an open text field on the home screen of your Android device. So that's all on there by default the first time you switch it on. That's before, and those are the sort of the two main practices. But basically, over the course of the next 10 weeks, the US State Department and supported by various states' attorney general, will end up setting out their evidence to say, look, we think you're abusing a dominant market position here. So we're going back into that rich tradition of US government actions against large corporate behemoths that goes all the way back to actions against things like Standard Oil and John D. Rockefeller 100 years ago. So this is the same thing. This is how the US government applies takes its regulatory action. It's not like in Europe where a regulator will just turn around and fine you a few billion in this. You actually have to prove it in front of a court of law. So that's what the Department of Justice will look to do. Interestingly, there has been litigation in Europe on this. Well, not necessarily litigation. There was investigation and fines from the European Commission with regards to Google, where it was saying, look, we think that you're putting you're promoting certain products and services that you sell or that you get a large amount of commission from for selling, and knocking certain independent retailers who've done nothing wrong and have tried to get a good result on your search results through SEO. They're now finding themselves, rather than on the first page, on the 15th page of search results. So there's been that in Europe, as well as in Europe there was also fines in relation to this same thing, this level of bundling of Google search. So the thing is, though, again, if you're turning over 1.7 trillion, even if you'll find a couple of billion euros, you won't like it. But all you're going to do is probably say, well, we'll tailor a few things. We're very sorry, we won't do it again. In Europe, where there's a couple of 100 million consumers, but in the rest of the world, where there's a few billion, they'll just carry on doing exactly what they were doing before. If, though, they have to change their habits in the United States, then that suggests that also for the rest of the world, it's more likely then that their habits and services might change based on this regulatory action. So this is the big one in terms of Google, and it'll also be casting a marker down for other big tech corporations in terms of how they operate, because of course everyone from Apple, Amazon, etc., they're always mindful of being on the receiving end of this sort of big regulatory investigation and action as well, in particular from the US federal government.
Thanks, Peter. So it would certainly be interesting over the next 10 weeks, and undoubtedly we'll be coming back with more coverage on this as the news transpires, because like you say, this is a very big case and actually might have a great deal more effect on Google throughout the rest of the world rather than the fines that it has been receiving in Europe here.
Yeah, and also that 10-week trial won't be the end of it. As if after that trial they go, yes, we think you are doing something that we don't agree with, they won't have a clue what sanction. Are they going to fine them? Are they going to say you have to stop doing such and such by a certain time? That would be yet to be decided. So there'd then have to be another trial to decide what's the enforcement going to be, and probably put a range of options in front of the judge and say, okay, what are we going to do then? And that would be for the court to decide.
Thanks, Peter. So that was our last discussion of today. And so although we've only covered the two stories, we've arguably covered some of the biggest tech firms in the world.
They're pretty big ones, aren't they? Yeah.
So if you would like to hear more from us, including subscribing to our newsletter, as well as receiving information about subscriber-only podcasts, webinars, and events, then please subscribe to Premium via our Patreon channel using the link in the show notes. A big thank you to Anson Evaluate for helping to produce this podcast. And if you would like to produce your own podcast or webinar, or you'd be interested to hear more about Anson Evaluate services, please take a look at their website that you can find at www.ansonevaluate.com. Just a reminder, these episodes are available on our website, our YouTube channel, podcast channels as well, such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and Google Podcasts. Oh, look, Google again. There we are. And please feel free to leave us a review. If you have any questions about what we have talked about today, please feel free to email us at admin@digitallawuk.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.